It was just after sunset, when Ethan stepped outside to check the storm damage on his property. The wind had finally died down, but the woods were eerily quiet, almost as if holding their breath. That's when he saw it. Two glowing amber eyes at the edge of the tree line. A wild bobcat stood there, drenched from the rain, its chest heaving. At first, Ethan thought it was hunting, but then he noticed something clenched tightly in its jaws. The animal staggered forward, limping, dragging its burden through the mud. Ethan's heart raced. This wasn't prey. Whatever the bobcat carried was alive, and the moment he realized what it was, he knew nothing in his life would ever be the same again. What happened next would blur the line between man and the wild. The storm raged through the valley all night. Branches cracked, windows rattled. Inside the old farmhouse, Ethan sat awake, listening to the wind tear at the walls. By morning, silence fell. Only the steady drip of rain from the eaves broke the stillness. Ethan, 46, a widower, pulled on his boots and stepped onto the porch. He expected broken fences, maybe fallen trees, but not this. Movement flickered at the edge of the clearing. At first it looked like a shadow in the dripping pines. Then it took shape, low to the ground, shoulders rolling, paws sinking into the mud. A bobcat. Ethan froze, breath catching. He'd seen them before, always at a distance, vanishing before he got a good look. But this one was different. It didn't bolt. It limped into view. Its fur was soaked, spiked with rain, and in its jaws, something heavy. The bobcat staggered closer, then dropped the bundle with a dull thud. With a rasping growl, it nudged the small shape forward. Ethan's heart clenched. Lying in the mud was a kitten, not a house cat, a bobcat kitten, tiny, trembling, eyes barely open. The mother stepped back, amber eyes locked on him. She didn't run, she didn't snarl. She just stood there, her body taut with desperation. "She brought it here to me," Ethan whispered. It seemed impossible. Wild animals avoided humans at all costs. And yet, here was a bobcat mother placing her young at his door. The kitten gave a broken cry. The sound cut through him like a knife. If he did nothing, it wouldn't survive the night. Slowly, Ethan crouched at the edge of the porch. The mother's ears twitched. He braced for her to lunge. But she didn't. She only watched, rain dripping from her whiskers. "It's okay," Ethan murmured. "I won't hurt him." With cautious hands, he reached for the tiny bundle, wrapping it in his jacket. The kitten shivered violently against the warmth, letting out another faint mew. Ethan looked up. The mother hadn't moved. Her chest rose and fell in quick bursts, but she stayed, as if waiting. "I'll help him," Ethan said aloud, though mostly to himself. "I promise." The bobcat blinked, holding his gaze for a heartbeat. Then she melted back into the trees. The clearing was silent again. But nothing about Ethan's world was silent anymore. He stood frozen, the weight in his arms heavier than anything he'd carried. The kitten's ribs lifted in shallow, ragged gasps. He rushed inside, laying it on a folded blanket near the fire. The farmhouse smelled of damp wood and smoke. Heat spread quickly from the hearth. Grabbing a clean towel, Ethan rubbed the fur dry. Each weak sound the kitten made tightened the knot in his chest. "What am I doing?" he muttered. "This is a wild animal. I'm not supposed to interfere." But then he remembered the mother's eyes, the raw desperation, the silent plea. She hadn't abandoned her child. She had chosen Ethan, trusted him. He couldn't ignore that. The fire crackled, filling the silence with pops and hisses. Ethan knelt by the blanket, watching the tiny chest rise and fall. Each breath sounded fragile, like it could be the last. He hurried to the kitchen. There wasn't much, just coffee, canned beans, and some milk in the fridge. He poured a little into a cup, warmed it, and searched for an eyedropper. Finding none, he tore a sponge into strips, soaked one, and held it to the kitten's mouth. For a moment, nothing. Then the kitten's tongue flicked, pulling in the milk. Ethan exhaled, relief washing over him. The small body stirred, drinking in slow, shaky sips. "Good," he whispered, "that's it. Keep fighting." When the kitten had taken all it could, Ethan settled back by the fire. He stroked the damp fur gently, as if afraid the fragile thing might crumble at his touch. His mind replayed the moment on the porch. The mother bobcat, the eyes that had met his, not filled with rage, not even fear, but something else, trust. It rattled him. Wild creatures didn't trust men, not after centuries of guns, traps, and fences. Yet she had walked through the storm, dragging her young to his door. Why him? Ethan leaned back, staring into the flames. His wife, Anna, had loved animals. She'd filled their home with strays, injured birds, abandoned pups, even a deer fawn once. Anna always said, "The wild knows when it needs help. We just have to listen." Ethan swallowed hard, grief pressing at him like it always did when she came to mind. It had been 3 years since she passed, and still the house felt too empty. Now, not anymore. For the first time, something fragile and alive depended on him again. He sat awake for hours, feeding, warming, whispering soft words he didn't even realize he was saying. By midnight, the kitten's breathing steadied. Its tiny body, once stiff with cold, relaxed against the folds of the blanket. Ethan allowed himself to breathe, too. The farmhouse was still battered by the storm's echoes, but inside, hope flickered. At dawn, light seeped through the rain-streaked windows. Ethan's eyes burned from fatigue, but he couldn't stop watching the kitten sleep. A noise broke the quiet. A faint scrape against the porch. His heart jolted. He set down the coffee mug and crept to the door. When he pulled it open, the air hit him cold and damp. And there she was, the mother bobcat, her fur matted, her body gaunt. She limped toward the steps, dragging something else in her jaws. Ethan's stomach twisted. Another burlap sack. She dropped it on the boards, sides heaving, eyes fixed not on him, but on what lay inside. Ethan crouched, hesitating. He pulled the wet knot loose, and his breath caught. Inside were 2 more kittens, smaller, weaker, barely moving. Ethan's hands trembled as he lifted the soaked bundles. The tiny bodies were cold as stone, their mews no louder than whispers. He rushed them inside, laying both near the fire. Their fur clung to their skin, waterlogged and heavy. One twitched faintly. The other barely stirred at all. "No, no, no," Ethan muttered, grabbing towels. He rubbed them quickly, trying to coax warmth back into their fragile frames. The mother bobcat remained outside, pacing the porch. Every few seconds she let out a hoarse cry, low, guttural, desperate. It wasn't a threat, it was a plea. Ethan's chest ached. "You've done your part," he whispered, glancing at her through the window. "Now it's on me." He worked frantically, fed them drops of warm milk, rubbed their tiny paws trying to spark circulation. One kitten coughed weakly, then latched onto the sponge. Ethan's heart leapt. "Yes, that's it. Stay with me." The other barely responded, its body sagged, limp in his hands. Ethan pressed it close, rocking gently, whispering, "Come on, don't quit now." Minutes felt like hours. Finally, the kitten gave a faint, raspy cry. It was enough. Ethan closed his eyes, letting out a shaky breath. Relief and fear tangled in his chest. He glanced again at the porch. The mother bobcat hadn't moved. She stood drenched and trembling, eyes fixed on the door. Ethan whispered through the glass, "They're alive." The bobcat blinked slowly as if she understood. Then, with a weary step, she vanished back into the trees. Morning turned to afternoon. Ethan never left the fire's side. He rotated the kittens in blankets, feeding them in turns. Their mews grew louder, their breathing steadier. Still, he knew he couldn't do this alone. He grabbed the phone, dialing the only person he trusted. After a few rings, a voice answered. "Dr. Harris." Ethan gripped the receiver. "It's Ethan. I need help." Urgent. Harris was the county vet, an old friend who'd seen every kind of rescue. But Ethan still hesitated before saying the words aloud. "A bobcat brought me her kittens." There was a pause on the line. Then Harris chuckled. "Ethan, storms make folks see strange things." "I'm not joking," Ethan snapped. "I watched it happen." She dragged them to my porch. She trusted me. Harris's tone shifted, serious now. "If that's true, it's extraordinary. I'll be there in an hour." By evening, headlights swept across the wet gravel drive. Harris climbed out, raincoat slung over his shoulders, carrying a worn leather bag. "All right," he said, stepping inside. "Show me." Ethan gestured to the hearth. 3 tiny kittens lay bundled together, breathing softly in the glow. Harris knelt, lifting one gently, his brow furrowed. "They're malnourished. Weak, but with care. They'll make it." He glanced up at Ethan. "But I need to know everything." From the start, Ethan exhaled. And for the first time, he told the whole story. Harris listened without interrupting. When Ethan finished, the vet leaned back, shaking his head slowly. "In 30 years, I've never heard of anything like this," he said. "A wild bobcat carrying her kittens to a human's porch? That isn't chance. That's trust." Ethan rubbed his temples. "Why me, though? Why not leave them in the forest?" "Maybe she knew she couldn't save them herself," Harris replied. "Animals sense things. They know when to ask for help, even if it means breaking the rules of the wild." Ethan sat in silence, staring at the fire. The kittens huddled together, tiny sides rising and falling. Harris placed a hand on his shoulder. "You've been chosen for this, Ethan." Like it or not, the next few days blurred into one long vigil. Ethan barely slept. Every few hours he warmed formula, fed each kitten drop by drop, and rubbed their fur dry. Harris visited often, checking progress. Each time he left with the same quiet amazement. They're fighters, just like their mother. But Ethan couldn't stop thinking about her. The way she had stood in the storm, ribs showing through soaked fur, eyes pleading. Was she still out there? Was she alive? One night, he got his answer. A sound woke him, scratching at the porch again. Heart pounding, Ethan grabbed his lantern and opened the door. The bobcat stood there, weary, thin but alive, and she wasn't alone. At her side, pressed close against her legs, moved 2 half-grown cubs, her own. Ethan froze, breath caught in his throat. She had kept them safe, through the storm, through hunger, and now she was showing them to him. The bobcat's amber eyes locked on his. No growl, no fear, only recognition. Ethan's chest tightened. You wanted me to see." For a moment, they simply stared at one another. Then, with a flick of her tail, she melted back into the forest, her cubs trotting after her. Ethan stood in the doorway long after they disappeared. The message was clear. She hadn't just trusted him with the weak, she wanted him to witness the strong. The following morning, Harris returned. Ethan told him what he'd seen. The vet smiled knowingly. "Then it's almost time." Ethan frowned. "Time for what?" "For them to go home." Harris said, nodding toward the kittens tumbling in the playpen by the fire. "They're strong now. Too strong to stay here much longer." Ethan's heart sank as he looked at them. Eyes bright, paws steady, tiny growls filling the room. He knew Harris was right, but the thought of letting them go twisted deep inside. "They're hers, Ethan," Harris said gently. "They always were." Spring gave way to summer. The kittens that once fit in Ethan's palm now bounded across the cabin floor. Hope, Ash, and Ember, that's what he called them. Each name carried a piece of fire, a piece of survival. They wrestled, pounced, and batted at the air with clumsy paws. Their cries were louder now, their eyes sharp with curiosity, no longer fragile, no longer on the edge of death. Ethan laughed softly as Ember scrambled up his pant leg, clinging with tiny claws. "You've got spirit, just like your mother," he murmured. Harris leaned in the doorway, arms crossed. "They've bonded to you," he said. "It's rare, Ethan." "They know who saved them." Ethan stroked the small head nestled against his chest. "I didn't save them," he whispered. "She did. I just carried the weight." But with every day that passed, one truth grew clearer. They couldn't stay forever. Ethan knew it. Harris reminded him gently. "They're thriving. Too wild for walls. They need the forest now." Ethan nodded, though his throat tightened each time the words were spoken. He had lost before. He wasn't ready to lose again. 2 weeks later, the moment arrived. Harris loaded the crate into the back of Ethan's truck. The kittens pressed their paws against the bars, voices high with confusion. The ride up the ridge felt longer than any Ethan had taken. His grip on the wheel was tight, knuckles white. At the clearing, Harris unlatched the crate. "Whenever you're ready," he said softly. Ethan crouched low, his eyes level with theirs. Hope, Ash, and Ember stared back at him, ears twitching, tails flicking. "It's time," Ethan whispered. "You don't belong to me. You belong to her." For a moment, the kittens hesitated. Then one by one, they leapt into the grass. Paws met earth with certainty. Their small bodies stretched, wild instincts guiding them forward. Ethan's heart ached as he watched them bound toward the trees. He wanted to call them back, but he stayed silent, because she was there. The bobcat mother emerged from the shadows, her coat sleek, her body strong. Her amber eyes glowed in the fading light. The kittens rushed to her side, nuzzling against her legs, purring their recognition. She lowered her head, grooming each one with steady licks. Ethan's vision blurred. Relief, heartache, pride, all tangled together. The bobcat lifted her gaze to him one last time, and in that look was no fear, no desperation, only acknowledgement. Then, with her family gathered close, she turned and disappeared into the forest. The forest grew quiet again. No scratching at the porch, no faint cries from a shoebox by the fire. For the first time in months, the cabin felt empty. And yet, Ethan didn't feel alone. Every rustle in the trees reminded him. Every cry in the night echoed their story. Somewhere out there, 3 young bobcats were growing, stronger, wilder, exactly as they were meant to be. Sometimes, while fixing fences or tending the fields, Ethan would catch himself looking toward the ridge. And once, just once, he saw her, the mother bobcat, a silhouette against the fading light. No bundle in her jaws this time, no desperate plea, just a steady gaze. Then she slipped back into the trees. Ethan smiled faintly. That was enough. One evening, Harris joined him on the porch. They sat in silence, watching the sun sink behind the Smokies. "You did something remarkable," Harris said finally. Ethan shook his head. "I didn't do anything. She did. She trusted me when she didn't have to. That's the miracle." Harris studied him for a moment. Maybe so. But you honored that trust. And that's just as rare. Ethan didn't reply. His eyes lingered on the darkening tree line. He could still see amber eyes in the shadows, watching, waiting. "I'll never forget her," he whispered, "or what she taught me." Harris tilted his head. "And what was that?" Ethan's voice was quiet but steady. "That sometimes the wild isn't as far from us as we think. Sometimes it walks right up to your porch asking for help." Night fell. Stars scattered across the sky. Inside, the fire crackled softly. Ethan leaned back in his chair, the weight of grief and solitude lighter than it had been in years. Because he knew. He hadn't just saved 3 bobcats. He had been saved too. A wild mother had given him back something he thought he'd lost forever: trust, hope, the chance to care again. And though he might never see her family again, the bond remained, etched deep in memory. A bobcat, 3 tiny kittens, and a story that blurred the line between the wild and the human heart.